This is part three of our three-part video series where we dive into a little bit more Florence, Venice, and Genoa. I have given you some videos a little bit prior to this on the Italian city-states, but I thought I'd specifically talk about some of the information that you would find in the textbook and some of the key points of each of these cities. So we're examining three powerful city-states as our case studies. So we'll begin with Florence. How did Florence reflect the Renaissance worldview? That's our guiding question. So we start with a little bit of a picture. This is a very famous building in Florence. And of course, late at night, the name escapes me. How did Florence reflect the Renaissance worldview? Okay, let's talk a little bit about their political and economic system. So political is governance, economic is money and business, all right? Florence was a city-state, a city that governs itself and the countryside around it, okay? So it was obviously a city-state. It was built near the Arno River, which has been a trade route for centuries, okay? So in other words, they had a long history of trading, all right? They were experienced in trading. They weren't newbies at it. It became a center for highly successful bankers and silk and wool merchants, okay? So what you'll find in common with these three cities, they all developed banking systems. They made so much money that people needed a bank to actually hold their money. And of course, they had their trade specialties. In the case of Florence, it was silk and wool. Richest of the city-states, you know what? This is kind of disputed. So I'll kind of highlight it, but kind of not, because a lot of people would argue Venice became the richest of the city-states. So maybe if I could draw a question mark on a freehand, I would draw a question mark there. But yeah, we'll carry on. Eventually run by one powerful family. So the Medicis. When you think of Florence, I want you to think of the Medici family. The Medici family was, to put it in modern terms, sort of like a mafia family. A mafia family, like a crime family. They did good things. I don't want to associate them and just give them a bad name. Some of the Medici, they had a huge family and they lasted for centuries. So obviously some of the Medicis were really solid people and some maybe less so. Some, became corrupt by their wealth and some maybe not so much. Some were generous and some were selfish. But the Medici family, regardless of, how much or how far we dive into their history, you cannot talk about Florence and the Renaissance without talking about the Medici family. It's just impossible. They ran the show, and they ran the show for a long time in Florence. And by show, I mean business and government. They were powerful and wealthy. If you think Medici family, just think power and wealth. And they also supported the arts. They gave, and by gave, I mean donated a lot of money to have beautiful buildings built and to support artists that wouldn't have created their art without that money. Okay, and the Medicis grew very wealthy. I mean, it's incredible how wealthy they became in one of the best industries going, banking. Yeah, they became bankers. And so, of course, if you're in the business of banking, if you do it right, you can make a lot of money. Even today, the Canadian banks, they're not hurting for money, okay? They're usually a very solidly run business, okay? So, part two, the social systems. What you see in Florence is a growing middle class, all right? Florence became kind of known for having that wider and wider middle class. More and more people were able to, maybe they weren't becoming super uber wealthy or rich, but they weren't just scraping by either. They knew where their next meal was coming from, unlike in the feudal system, if you're a serf and peasant. I mean, you often didn't even know what you're going to eat the next day. Merchants were doing quite well, and the more money you get, the more power that you're going to have. They organized guilds. When you think of guilds, again, I want you to think of unions. Okay, in other words, groups of people with a common profession. So teachers have a union. We call it the Alberta Teachers Association, and it's a union. The nurses have a union. Welders have a union. Lots of different trades have unions. So in the old days, if there was teachers around back then in the Renaissance, we would have called ourselves a guild, the Teachers Guild, okay? There's an organization of craftsmen and merchants. As it said, it's similar to today's unions. Okay, culture. The Medicis fostered Renaissance culture. It's unbelievable how much money they spent building buildings and supporting artists and supporting universities and supporting libraries. It's really quite incredible. So they're a fascinating family to study. Some people study that family when they go to university as part of their Renaissance major. And it's they have quite the history. They promoted the ideals of citizenship, okay? Not just, I'm talking the Medici family here, but Florence. Florence really had this culture of you're a Florentine. In other words, you belong, you're a citizen of Florence, and you should be proud of it. Okay, a little bit more on the Medici family. They had a powerful influence in Florence for 3 centuries. That's a long time for one family to have power. They controlled the government, they paid for churches, supported famous artists, they studied the work of ancient Romans, and they held social events. You can translate that as parties. They had parties for people. They had money to spend, and they spent it.